speaking of crazy, Donald Trump suggested Vladimir Putin, in his words, has gone absolutely crazy. Is that crazy like a fox, or is he unhinged, Daniel Davis? Because some of me thinks it's based on our prior conversations, my observations, and reporting in the news. It's more crazy like a fox.
Well, listen, I was a bit perplexed because in that both the Truth Social that Trump posted as well as his comments that he made there before he got back on Air Force One, he talked about how he was really surprised, et cetera, that Russia was doing that. And I don't understand why he would be surprised, why anyone would be surprised, because Russia is doing exactly what they've said they were going to do. They said they will not have a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. They will keep fighting and keep talking at the same time. They want a negotiated settlement on their terms, or they'll simply keep fighting for it. And listen, also this drone attack into Kiev that Trump was so animated about is the fact that there has been back and forth for going back to the several days, like 5 or 6 days in a row. Ukraine launched hundreds, like 700 or 800 drones into Russia, tried to attack into Moscow. Moscow retaliated every day. So it's a back and forth deal. It's a war, and both sides are continuing to fight. So I'm not sure why anyone would be surprised by these sequence of events.
Well, and something you and I have talked about before, and is the expense of launching missiles to knock down drones or other missiles from the sky. And as I read, now the drone attacks feature an array of decoy projectiles that are meant to intimidate drone strikes, but don't carry explosives. So Ukraine starts shooting at objects which don't have any destructive power, but there's no way for the Ukrainians to know whether or not they're armed or not. But obviously that frees up an opportunity for other drones to fill in the holes and attack the targets. I don't. This is modern warfare, and I don't know how it's going to evolve down the road, but it seems to make perfect sense to me that you would use, a bunch of fake ones in there in the mix with the real ones, increasing the likelihood you're going to actually hit your target.
Right, and that's the problem that you really illuminated there. That from the Ukraine side, they have no idea which is which, because a lot of them are what's called repurposed S-300 anti-aircraft missiles, and they look just like incoming missiles on the radar screen. You can't tell the difference apart, but they're just basically rocket motors that are flying in the air, and you have to, or even the slow drones. There's a medium speed drones, etc. All these things require you either have to shoot them down, or they're going to strike their target. And what we're seeing, by the way, I told you there's this big, huge, like multi-hundred drone strike in both directions. Nearly all of the ones from the Ukraine side to Russia were shot down. Hardly any made it through, a handful, a few. But on the Russian side, when they're firing into Ukraine, a substantial portion of both the missiles and the drones are hitting their target. And especially the night before last in Odessa, there was just catastrophic damage in there. And of course, you've seen the videos, I'm sure, from Kiev, etc. You don't see a commensurate vision on that on the Russian side because they have the air defense missiles and the Ukraine side has insufficient air defense missiles. And this point, it is a math problem for the Ukraine side.
Right, which continues a theme that you and I have been discussing now for what seems like months. Well, I guess it has been. The lack of arms that the Ukraine has, and I guess the inability of NATO to keep up with the demand, and the United States, of course, I believe, paring back its provision of weapons to Ukraine. And I see German Chancellor Merz now is telling the Ukrainians that there's no longer going to be any limit on the range of the weapons. So it seems like this is like another step toward World War III. If NATO countries are providing long-range missiles for Ukraine to fire deeper and deeper into Russia, and I guess the military strategy as well, if they're building a bunch of these drones at a factory that's 200, 300, 500 miles inside Russia, then of course that facility is fair game since it's funding the Russian troops or providing weapons for the Russian troops. But this is going to more directly implicate NATO, and to the extent they start, intruding into Russian real estate, that increases the likelihood of some kind of armed conflict, doesn't it?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because the comment by Chancellor Merz, the new German chancellor, made a point of saying on German television yesterday that UK, France, now Germany, and he said the United States have all lifted all restrictions on all these weapons, and now they can fire deep. Well, there's many problems with it. They don't have that many missiles that we're talking about. Russia can launch literally hundreds per month, every single month, because they have the industrial capacity of long-range missiles. Most or a good portion of them get through. But on the U.S. and NATO side, we have probably a couple hundred total. I think there's 200 Taurus missiles from Germany that could be put into the mix. We've already said that our ATACMS long-range missiles, we were near the end of that at the end of the Biden administration. We don't have a lot to put in there. So why in God's name would you want to like escalate the situation by striking something deep inside Russia with one of your missiles when you know that Russia can fire 10 back for every one you can shoot and risk exploding the war? Yesterday, Russia said to merits, if German missiles fire deep into Russia and strike a target, we will consider that as direct participation of Germany in the conflict and will react accordingly. They left it vague what it is, but it's very clear they could either strike Germany itself, German assets. There's no telling what they could do. But if we think that Russia is going to allow that to happen and do nothing, I don't think we've been paying attention.
Yeah, and the other component of this is a lot of the hardware that we provided to Ukraine, and we've had our own people there helping them to operate it because they don't have the security clearances necessary to make the longer range missiles work. And I presume that's got to be the case with Germany's weapon systems, which means there are boots on the ground in Ukraine from foreign lands, most notably NATO countries, that are helping out in the waging of this war. I mean, I don't know what the rules of engagement are all about, but that sounds to me like we're already engaged in direct conflict. It's just we don't have the uniformed troops on the front line shooting with small weapons.
Yeah, we just don't have them on the front line. But also, by the way, both the Storm Shadow and the Taurus missiles require U.S. help also for targeting and other telemetry data, et cetera, not just the German boots on the Kiev ground, so to speak, where they're being launched from. So our fingerprints, even the United States, is on the all these missiles that fire long range.
And so going back to the point about Ukraine hitting further and further or deeper into Soviet, here I go again, I'm channeling backwards, into Russian territory, say they are going after the drone factory. Militarily, I guess that makes sense from Ukraine perspective. But if a NATO country, say Germany, is providing the war waging equipment to Ukraine, then it seems to be fair play for Russia to go ahead and bomb the factories that are making that particular type of equipment.
Yeah, we don't want to ever put them in the position to make that rational calculation, because here's the thing. There is too little thought on what is the intent of using a given military a piece of hardware or a tactic. Yes, you can say from a certain perspective, totally legitimately, that anything in Russia is fair game because everything in Ukraine is fair game. That's one issue. But then you have to say, what is the probability of helping the Ukraine side in changing the balance of war, and what is the risk of retaliation against us and drawing us directly into the war? That's where the calculations aren't being made. They're just doing the easy one, and they're not doing the harder one, which could, as you very clearly point out, cause escalation that could actually drag us in. And the last thing anybody in the West should want is the possibility of having this thing escalate when it should be in its death throes, the whole war.
Yeah, indeed. Every day that goes by, it makes more and more progress insofar as its movement into Ukraine. So less and less, more and more land is taken by Russia. Yes. And that's why I started out with crazy like a fox, because the longer Putin drags this out and refuses to sit down at the table, the more likely it is he's going to end up taking over the whole country if he wants to. But in terms of a peace process, any negotiation, it's still Russia's position that they will not sit down unless Ukraine agrees to disarm and disavow its desire to join NATO, correct?
That is correct. Yes. Sergei Lavrov reiterated that about 4 days ago in a little known clip from the West, where he just categorically said, yeah, we're not even going to consider anything short of demilitarization and denazification, and of course the no NATO part too. So yes.
So we're not making any forward progress here.
The two sides continue to go in opposite directions with the Chancellor Merz with Zelensky continuing to talk really antagonistic toward anything. Russia continuing to say, I want more stuff. You have more people on this now with Trump making these comments, more people in the U.S. saying, you know what, more sanctions and let's do more weapons. Jack Keane was on Fox News this morning making that impassioned plea. all of which go the opposite direction of bringing this to a conclusion and increase the chance that Ukraine will ultimately be militarily defeated.
Okay, real quick before we part company, on sanctions, do you think that sanctions could be a potential inroad to getting Russia to sit down and maybe take a little less stronger stance at the outset? I mean, do we have anything left in our sanction arsenal to give to do harm to Russia?
You know, I'm not a skilled mathematician, but whatever the number less than zero is, that's the chances for the sanctions having any impact. If you've had zero for 17 rounds of sanctions when the U.S. was fully on board and, you know, had the quote crippling sanctions, and Russia weathered all that, and now their economy is growing at a faster pace than ours is, then that tells you all you need to know, that Russia has made themselves sanction proof. And it is more insulting than it is effective to think that you're going to have another sanctions round that's going to do what almost 4 years of efforts before have failed to do. It's irrational.
Didn't pull any punches on that response, Daniel Davis. Now, finally, one final question. In terms of the available troops to fight the war on behalf of Ukraine, they got to be running out soon, or the numbers have to be perilously small. They've lost so many people on the front lines. Do they have a well to go back to anymore?
No, in fact, there's been a couple of research reports issued in just the last handful of days in the West and some in Ukraine as well that have calculated that Russia, and I think it was just the last month, recruited 50,000 troops in a single month. 50,000, and the casualty rate is way less than that. So by maybe 10, 15,000, they're adding more troops than they are losing. But at Ukraine, even with forced mobilization, where they literally take people off the streets, and that's now a routine thing in Ukraine, they're not even able to offset losses. So both the Ukraine side is shrinking every day. The quality of what they can put in, up to a quarter, and some reports say that they actually flee the battlefield when they get there. And then you have the Russian side getting bigger, stronger economically, industrial capacity. Everything is growing. So any way you want to look at this, it's bad news for the Ukraine and the Western side.
Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Find him online. Get his podcast. Tune in every Tuesday at 8:30, the 55 KRC Morning Show. I'm not sure what we call that news, Dan. It depends on which side of the ledger you're on.
The truth. Wow. It's as simple as that. It's the truth.
There you have it. I love getting truth, and we all get it from you. Until next Tuesday, my friend.